I've seen a Facebook post on a few of my friends' feeds from a gentleman named Brad Stewart. I don't know Brad. I don't know what his background is, but it's a very well written post. It's very pro liberal, anti conservative. Of course, a lot of people are dead set against everything he's saying, but I thought, okay, let's look at it and see how factual it is. And there's a lot of facts to what he says. It's a very well laid out argument. And my purpose here isn't to dissuade anybody that wants to believe in what Mr. Stewart's saying. If your mind's already made up, that's great. Just here to prevent more facts. I think there's some facts he left out. I think there's some great points he's made, but there's some facts he left out. And I think for us to make intelligent decisions in this election, we should all consider all the facts and then make our own decisions.
So Brad writes,
Polls show that older Canadians are more likely to support the Liberals, and there's a reason for that. We've seen governments come and go. We remember the Petro-Canada era, the National Energy Program backlash, the Mulroney cuts, the Creatine surpluses, the Harper austerity, and the COVID-era interventions. We've lived through it, not just read about it online. What that history teaches you is that governance isn't about slogans. It's about outcomes.
Governance isn't about slogans, it's about outcomes. That's a great slogan. I think there's some other things at play here as well. In my opinion, I think older Canadians prefer to stick with the Liberal Party because traditionally that is the party. They've won more elections than anybody through the whole history of our country. I think people are, as we age, are very reluctant to change and to new ideas. And there's a little bit of safety in what we already have and what we know, kind of the evil you know versus the evil you don't know. And I think a lot of our older Canadians have this vision of a prime minister being aristocratic and educated and polished. And if you look at the business world, statistics show if you're a tall white male, you're probably going to be more often in a position of leadership than somebody that isn't. And I'm not saying that's right by any means. That's just the way it is. People are more comfortable with that. And I think that's partially at play here as well.
So if we're going to talk about the last 9 years, then let's be honest and look at the last 30. You can't understand where we are without knowing who brought us here.
So I think that's a good point. I think it's a great start. And let's do that. However, I do think 9 years is sufficient time for a government to turn around anything that isn't going well. I guess the hockey analogy I'd use is 10 years later, are the Leafs still blaming Dave Nonis, who was the GM 10 years ago, for the fact they haven't won a cup yet? So I think 9 years is enough time.
Point number one, taxes. The GST, that was Mulroney's Conservatives. The HST, brought in and expanded under Harper. Meanwhile, Trudeau's government lowered the middle-income tax rate from 22% to 20.5%. So no, taxes haven't gone through the roof for most Canadians. Let's keep the facts in the room.
So I think if we're talking about income taxes, is correct. The middle income tax bracket was lowered. But I think people are talking about other taxes like the carbon tax and hidden payroll taxes, all the things that are driving up the cost for Canadians. And if we want to go back to Mulroney and blame him for the GST, absolutely. He's the guy that put it in. It's what cost him the next election. But the GST, don't forget, was to replace the hidden manufacturing services tax, which was 12.5 or 13.5%. I can't remember. Sorry, I should have looked it up. So that's what the GST came in to do, and it applied to services as well. So it was a more transparent consumer-based tax, not the hidden manufacturing-based tax, which ironically is kind of what we're doing now, but in the reverse, right? With the carbon tax, we take away the carbon tax that was to the consumers, that was visible, that everyone hated, and now we're making a hidden tax on the manufacturers where the prices will get down to the consumers. So it's the same thing in reverse. But absolutely, Mulroney did that. Harper did help bring in the HST, but the HST is a harmonized sales tax. So that just took the old PST, provincial sales tax. Remember at one point we had 7% federal tax and 8% provincial sales tax for 15% tax. Then it actually went down to 13% when it was harmonized as an HST. So did Harper bring in the HST? Absolutely he did. But it was harmonizing two taxes that were already existing. So it's a little bit of a game that Mr. Stewart is playing with words here, as far as I'm concerned anyway. Just my opinion. Additionally, after Mulroney did bring in the GST, John Chrétien campaigned on and won partially in part on promising to eliminate the GST, and he didn't. When Harper came along, he reduced it from 6% and then down to 5% where it's been there. So just a fact that wasn't included. I'm not saying it's factually wrong, just additional facts.
Number two, scandals. Every government has them. The difference is how they're handled. Under Trudeau, ministers who violated ethics rules resigned. The ethics commissioner's office was expanded. By contrast, Harper's government was found in contempt of Parliament, an unprecedented event in Canadian history.
Okay, no argument about the Harper government. absolutely factual. And in fact, hey, there were a couple of liberal ministers that resigned due to ethics violations. Bill Morneau over the WE charity scandal, and Randy Boissonnault. Two other liberal ministers resigned due to the SNC-Lavalin scandal, and where Prime Minister Trudeau tried to force Jody Wilson-Raybould to interfere in that and to not prosecute SNC-Lavalin. Jane Philpott resigned in support of Wilson-Raybould. What's ironic about that is, so they resigned not because of ethics, but because of the Prime Minister's ethics. And in fact, the Prime Minister himself was found guilty on 3 separate occasions by the Ethics Commission that he violated ethics rules. You got the AgaCon vacation, the WE charity scandal that cost Morneau his job, and then you've got the SNC-Lavalin where Wilson-Raybould and Philpott resigned. So did all Liberal cabinet ministers resign ethics? Sure. A couple of them did, but the big man himself sure didn't.
Number 3, crime. Despite the headlines, serious crime is lower now than it was in the 1990s. Yes, there have been spikes in specific areas and categories, but the long-term trend is clear. Let's stop pretending we're living in some lawless dystopia.
Mr. Stewart is absolutely correct. The statistics do not show a rise in crime. However, statistics also show that about 71% of crimes aren't even reported. And there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. It can be family, domestic disputes. It could be shame, embarrassment of being scammed. It could be the fact I'm not going to even bother reporting my stolen vehicle to insurance companies. There's a whole bunch of reasons. I don't have any stats that show crimes on the rise whatsoever. I just know a lot more people now that have had their car stolen. I know a lot more break-ins in my neighborhood. Maybe I live in a bad part of town. I don't know. So anecdotally, I think crime has risen. Statistically, it doesn't back it up. So I'll have to give Mr. Stewart his point on that. What I will say, one of the biggest problems we do have with crime, though, is the amount of repeat offenders, the amount of people that are out on parole or bail, released before their trial starts, that are repeat offenders. And a lot of them are violent. And
Number 4, immigration. Yes, the international student surge put pressure on housing services, but reforms are already in place. Caps, tighter oversight, and new criteria. At the same time, many of the people complaining about immigration were also the ones yelling about labor shortages. Immigration isn't the problem. Mismanagement was, and it's being corrected.
okay, I somewhat agree here. Mismanagement is probably the biggest factor. But I also think the biggest issue that I have with immigration is that we don't have the infrastructure to support it. We don't have the hospitals. We don't have the housing. And we need to curtail that. It's just like being on an airplane. They teach you when that oxygen mask comes down, you put it on yourself first. You save yourself first before you start looking around at anybody else. That's the only difference I have. And when we talk about international students, I think we're also forgetting in this post about asylum seekers or the temporary foreign workers. I think that's a whole other part of the discussion that we should be holding.
Number 5, national debt. Yes, the debt grew during the pandemic, but that spending kept businesses open, families afloat, and supply chains functioning. Canada's debt-to-GDP ratio is still the lowest in the G7. So while we need fiscal discipline, we're not teetering on the edge like some would have you believe. And who might you want in a leadership position to manage that?
Okay, here I think where we're missing some important points. So our net debt to GDP ratio is in fact the best of the G7. But our gross debt to GDP ratio is about 27th out of 33 countries in the advanced economic societies, if you will. So what's the difference between gross and net? Simply our liquid assets. And so what the biggest calculation difference between those is our pensions, our CPP and our Quebec pension plan. So if we were to liquidate those pensions, because those are debts that are to us as Canadians as we age, if we're to liquidate that and use that to pay down our debt, then that gives you the net debt to GDP ratio, which is best in the G7. So yeah, you want to liquidate our pensions and apply that to our debt, we're top shelf. You don't want to do that, we're down pretty far. Another really important, to me anyway, I'm not an economist, or a very good linguist apparently, but very important ratio to me is our GDP per capita growth, and so that's showing what our country is producing per person on an average, and it's very low. It's very low. It's one of the worst in the. And I certainly acknowledge that we had to run up our debt during COVID. That was important, I think there's a lot of waste there, but there's probably a lot of waste in every country, right? So let's not argue that point. So running up our debt during COVID, absolutely understand. But our debt just didn't start during COVID. It started basically from the time that Justin Trudeau took over. Our deficit was like $1.9 billion a year he took over, and then kept climbing and climbing. Huge spike during COVID, uh, but we still have deficits. We're still predicted to run deficits for $60 billion a year for the next couple of years. So the analogy that I'd use for my own situation is, let's say during COVID I lost my job. And let's say I had equity in my house and I took out a home equity line of credit to give me some money to put food on the table for my families so that I could still survive. Great. Understand, good use of debt. Pandemic's over, back to work, world has returned to normal. I'm still taking out additional loans on my house because now I've gotten used to buying stuff that I don't really need. And to me, oversimplification, but that's what's happening with our deficits.
Number 6, housing crisis. Housing is a provincial and municipal responsibility. The feds can help with funding and incentives, and they have. But zoning, permitting, and approvals are in the hands of cities and provinces. If you're sitting in a home that's tripled in value and complaining about housing affordability, maybe take a second look at the system that helped you and is now hurting others.
Hey, I kind of agree on this point. Um, yeah, there's things the federal government can do, I guess, but both parties, as far as I see, are really promoting the new housing thing. So either they're both doing it and they don't really have any control over it. I don't know. I don't know what to think about it. All I suggest is that runaway immigration, demand versus supply, probably isn't helping our housing picture whatsoever. Then there's the whole aspect of foreign investments, foreign ownership. Who knows where that money is coming from? Who knows the impact of crime, money laundering? There's probably a whole bunch of other reasons that housing is not affordable.
Number 7, run government like a business. Government isn't a business. You can't cut the sick, the poor, or the unprofitable. You don't get to fire your bad customers. Government is supposed to serve all of us, not turn a profit. Fortunately, we got someone with the right mindset. Mark Carney, Harvard and Oxford educated, former governor of the Bank of Canada and Bank of England, and a guy who helped steer the global economy through the 2008 financial crisis. He understands spending, restraint, and sustainability, and he does it without screwing over the people at the bottom.
Partially agree with this. Government's job is to protect our poor, our sick, our vulnerable, and to provide economic stability over their lives. It's not to make a profit like a business. However, I would argue that if you ran it like a business, what that could mean is making wise choices, spending your money efficiently and without waste. Sound financial decisions, avoiding debt, building up a surplus that when a world pandemic comes around, you have a little money in the kitty that you can spend on programs and not incur further debt. Run your departments efficiently and effectively. I would suggest that Carney's plan to continue deficit spending shows that he may understand what spending and fiscal restraint is, but he certainly doesn't plan on exhibiting any of those behaviors.
Number 8, military. The Harper government slashed defense spending to its lowest level since World War II. Bases closed. Veterans were ignored. The current government has increased spending, committed to modernization, and started rebuilding our global reputation. It's slow, but it's real.
Hey, totally agree. Now, to be fair, Harper did increase spending 2006 to 2009, but then he did cut, and too far. Totally agree. I think the world was a little bit of a different place then. I don't think there was the China rush threat that we have now. But you know what? I'm going to give Mr. Stewart full props on this one. 100%, we cut our military too far.
Number 9, freedom of speech. The last real gag order in this country was under Harper, when government scientists were forbidden from sharing research that the government didn't agree with. Now, conservatives are openly discussing using the notwithstanding clause to override Supreme Court rulings. That's not freedom, that's control.
So this one's a little bit of a tough one. Agreed, Harper's gag order on scientists was wrong. That should not have happened. But I also think that we've had some freedom of speech issues with the liberals. You can't get news on Facebook anymore. They've blocked that. They froze bank accounts during the truckers' protest, and even just that protest itself, like a truckers' protest, which was, hey, we're going to freeze bank accounts, and that's an insurrection, versus what we're seeing on the protests about Israel and Gaza and Hamas all the time in all the cities. That doesn't seem to be curbed. So there's a little bit of inconsistency on what freedom of speech and freedom of assembly is here, as far as I'm concerned. The notwithstanding clause is admittedly tricky. I guess my first question is, why do we even have it if it can't be used? So Pierre Trudeau put it into place. It was to give governments the ability to overrule the courts. That's the purpose of it. Saskatchewan has invoked it, Quebec has invoked it, and Ontario has invoked it. I understand the concern of it being a slippery slope if the federal government were to use it for the first time. So it's a concern, but then ask yourself, well, why is it even there if it's not for governments to use?
Number 10 conservatives and Republicans. Are Canadian conservatives the same as U.S. Republicans? No. Are they increasingly aligned? Yes. They belong to the same international party alliance, use the same culture war tactics, and have increasingly adopted U.S. style talking points on immigration, media, and identity.
Agreed. 100% agree. I think we also have to acknowledge that the liberals have pushed so far to the left that they're very similar to the Democrats in the US that are with all the identity politics, if you will, all the focus on things like that, that they're so far to the left that they've actually made the NDP irrelevant. There's no need for the NDP now. Remember when the Liberals used to be kind of center to center left? Then the NDP was left and the Conservatives were right. Well, the Liberals have pushed the NDP right off the face of being relevant for anything. That's maybe good or bad, but it's pushing us towards a two-party system just like the States. Are the Conservatives right? Absolutely they are. So personally, I consider myself a center-right person. I don't deny that. I'm not a far right extremist. I'm a center right person. But I think that the current Conservative Party is closer to the center than the Liberals are. I think the Liberals have shifted too far left. Just my opinion.
Number 11, homelessness. Homelessness didn't just pop up overnight. Mental health issues have been exacerbated by decades of cuts, especially by conservative provincial governments that closed psychiatric hospitals and reduced access to services. Many people end up self-medicating just to survive. And for those saying just get a job, if you're fighting for survival every single day, it's tough to think about anything else. A job interview isn't step one. Stabilization and treatment are. We need systems that treat the root, not punish the symptom.
100% agree with Mr. Stewart on this. Closing the psychiatric hospitals, at least in Ontario, is the worst thing we've done. Um, I totally agree. In my opinion, that's what's caused all this problem. Now, to blame it solely on the Conservatives in Ontario, absolutely. But I don't remember a Conservative government in British Columbia. And if you go down East Hastings Street in British Columbia, it is not a pretty sight. So you can't really blame the Conservatives on that. And regardless, 9 years. We've had 9 years to collectively fix this problem, and we're not getting anywhere. I don't see a great plan here. I think uh, addiction treatment and prevention and facilities for that and rehabilitation facilities and psychiatric hospitals, absolutely we need to get back to that. So totally agree with Mr. Stewart on that.
Number 12, healthcare. The feds have increased transfers, $198.6 billion over 10 years, with a $3.1 billion deal signed with Ontario alone. But the Financial Accountability Office says Ontario is underfunding healthcare by $21.3 billion. So ask yourself, where's that money going?
So I agree, but I think here's where we need a little bit more clarifications or background information. Ontario receives less funding per capita than any other province. Prior provincial governments froze funding for years. Doug Ford, when he came in as premier, increased funding, not at the right rate. Like we're still underfunded, but it has been increased. You've got an aging population. You've got this immigration problem. Where do most of the people settle? Big part of it's Toronto, right? So absolutely, healthcare is underfunded. The statement of being underfunded by $21.3 billion, sorry, is a little bit misleading. That's spread out over 6 years. So it's still a lot. It's still about $3 billion a year underfunded. Some of that is that the provincial government can't even spend it because we don't have enough doctors, we don't have enough nurses. And there's a whole other discussion on that. So I would say I partially agree. There's definitely underfunding and underspending in our health systems. I think it is both a provincial and a federal issue, though.
Number 13, national infrastructure. The Trans Mountain Pipeline, purchased and completed by this government. The Coastal GasLink LNG pipeline to Kitimat, operational. Pipelines got built, quietly, without press conferences and bumper stickers.
Without press conferences and bumper stickers. For somebody that doesn't like slogans, that's another great one. I love it. Anyway, so absolutely, the government took over the Trans Mountain Pipeline because TC Energy couldn't afford to continue because of the regulations, prohibitive regulations. So the government took it over. spent like another $34 billion. It was a hugely cost overrun project because the government's running it. That's what happens when governments run big projects. And but think of all the projects that were canceled. There's like 7 major projects that were canceled. So yeah, we got one pipeline or one LNG line. There's a lot that have been canceled. Don't deny that. There's been about $670 billion in infrastructure projects that have been canceled, mostly because of regulations. A lot also because of environmental concerns, climate concerns, Bill C-69, indigenous concerns. But let's not kid ourselves that this government's been a pipeline pro, okay?
Number 14, Quebec/jurisdiction realities. Housing, healthcare, education. These are provincial responsibilities. The bloc leader was absolutely right to call it out. I love Quebec's culture, the way they approach business internationally. Canada is stronger with Quebec at the table with us. If we want real progress, we need federal leadership that brings all levels of government together, not just one that tweaks demands from Ottawa.
Yeah, so I agree. Quebec is a unique culture, always has been, always will be. I don't disagree. I guess my only question would be, after 9 years, the bloc is still very relevant in Quebec. So if we had a federal government that was working with Quebec and supporting Quebec the way that Quebec wants to be respected, would the bloc need to exist? So the fact that they still exist suggests that maybe the Liberals haven't been all that great with Quebec. Just my opinion.
Number 15, Alberta. Oil and gas make up 21% of Alberta's economy, but only 3.2% of Canada's GDP. Alberta matters, but it's not the whole show. Its heritage fund sits at $22.9 billion. Norway's oil fund, $1.7 trillion. Had we stuck with a national energy strategy, like the NEP, Alberta alone could be getting $8 billion a year in transfers, covering its infrastructure budget. Who killed the NEP? Mulroney's Conservatives, under pressure from Alberta and U.S. oil interests. I've always enjoyed my time in Alberta, and Canada is stronger with Alberta at the table.
Hey, I totally agree. Now, in fairness, I think Alberta had a big role in killing the NEP. I don't think it was just Mulroney. I think Alberta really campaigned for that, if you will. I also think C-69 is very restrictive and is not going to allow us to do something like what Norway does. But the Norway model would be fantastic, and I 100% agree that's the way, or one of the ways we should be looking at it.
Number 16, experience and leadership. Mark Carney isn't a career politician. He's a globally respected economist with Harvard and Oxford degrees, former governor of the Bank of Canada, governor of the Bank of England, and chair of the Financial Stability Board during the 2008 crash. He's guided entire economies through disaster. He doesn't need applause. He needs a mandate.
He doesn't need applause. He needs a mandate. Man, for somebody that doesn't like slogans, that's another good one. That's a really good one. Okay, this is really going to get me going, and I'm sorry, but Mark Carney isn't a career politician. Yeah, neither was Donald Trump. And regardless, here's my whole issue with the Carney and his CV is going to save us. The highest educated does not necessarily make the best leader. In fact, it was a Harvard Business School study in 2015 showed that 70% of what makes a leader effective is their emotional intelligence, EQ, if you will, self-awareness, empathy, things like that, people skills, right? It's not just the education. Education makes up for about 30% of that. Furthermore, on top of that, even with education itself, there's something called the law of diminishing returns, right? So a high school educated person, maybe not a great leader, you could argue. There's exceptions, I'm sure. You get up to a college or a university grad, hey, you're getting some bang for your buck. You go up to a master's, the next level up, yeah, you're getting a little bit better of a leader. You're going up to a PhD, you're not really gaining anything by that. Unless you're in a super tech industry or a pharmaceutical industry, then maybe a PhD is a benefit. Um, an economics PhD to run a country where you have multiple departments. Running a country isn't just the economy. It's not just an economist's job. It's about all the different policies and procedures and governance and all the different departments, housing and social programs. It's not just an economist's job. And if it was, what about all the other Bank of Canada governors we had in the past, or all the people PhDs in economics? Why didn't they become prime minister? Why aren't they running other countries around the world? Like, it's a little bit of a stretch to say that Carney's economic strength in his degrees and his PhDs is what's needed in this time. Leadership is about running a team, getting the most out of your team. So what's Carney's team? He's inheriting the same folks that have been in power for 10 years. So is that a great team? And if it is, well, then where have they been for the last 9 or 10 years? And if it's not a great team, then you've got the other issue that Carney's going to be the smartest man in the room. And if you're ever in a room with somebody that's the smartest person in the room, first of all, you know it. Second of all, if you're working for them, you don't question them on anything because they will tell you they are the smartest person in the room and they know best, and that's the way it's going to go. Right? Anybody that's worked in a big company knows that's how that stuff works. So, do you have a Democratic PM, or do you have somebody that's a little bit more dictator like, if you will? I would suggest the smartest man in the room, the smartest man in the country, is not going to be open to any ideas from anybody but himself. And this whole crisis thing, this Trump tariff crisis, and Carney saying it's the biggest crisis of our time, that's ridiculous. COVID was a crisis. 9/11 was a crisis. You could say the Quebec referendum was a crisis. That was in our lifetime. I'm old enough that the FLQ, that was a crisis. Trump tariffs, the world economy is going to figure that out. And anybody that thinks Canada is going to drop the gloves or elbows up with the biggest superpower in the world, both economically and militarily, is insane. Like, we're just not going to win a war with the States on any front. But Carney likes to use this crisis. I've managed through crisis. Well, have you really, though? Like, let's think about 2008, because who even remembered Carney's name back then? I sure didn't. All I knew is that Canada was safe because we had stringent regulations for our banking. We had higher asset to debt loan structures, if you will. We weren't in the same space of the Americans. We didn't have 40-year mortgages. So the American economy was a house of cards waiting to fall. We had stricter regulations. Did Carney have a role? Absolutely. His role of Bank of Canada governor was to lower the interest rates, inject some money into the economy, get investment going, and he did a fine job of that. But let's not forget what Jim Flaherty did. Jim Flaherty was a finance minister at the time, also the guy that introduced the TFSA. Thanks, Jim. Rest in peace. And he was a great guy. Don't kid you not. Also a Harvard-educated guy, I believe. Harvard or Oxford. I want to say Harvard. Also a hockey player, but one of the most humble, down-to-earth, nice guys you're ever going to meet. Not arrogant, pompous, and self-appreciating, I guess. But I digress. Flaherty had actually run multiple consecutive surplus budgets to put us in a position of having extra money that he could inject fiscal stimulus into the economy on infrastructure problems to help us through that crisis. Flaherty, if anybody, deserves credit. Or you could even say Paul Martin, when he was the Liberal finance minister before Flaherty, Paul Martin had a lot to do with our stringent regulations in our banking. So did Carney play a role? Sure, but he didn't lead us through any crisis. Don't kid yourself. His impact in the UK during the Brexit crisis, during COVID, debatable. I'll be honest, I haven't looked up too much. I don't really care that much. Go do your own research. But I don't think he's this crisis management genius he's painting himself out to be. Plus, he's also what we used to call, when I worked, individual contributor roles. He's not leading a team. He's not the leader of a team to rally people around him. The world is going to figure out the Trump tariff. Now, there's a whole other discussion you can have on the Trump tariffs and how it might be about lowering their treasury rate to renew their debt. It might be asserting global dominance to ensure that their currency is the reserve currency for the world. There's a whole bunch of strategies. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, Trump's going to do what Trump's going to do. And the world is going to figure out this Trump tariff strategy. We need to focus on our economic prosperity, not our sovereignty issues that we're going to be invaded by the neighbors to the south.
So where does that leave us? We need to stop electing people who appeal to anger and nostalgia and start supporting those who understand the complexity of the world we actually live in. It's time to vote for intelligence, collaboration, and leaders who put people over slogans, substance over showmanship, and public service over self-interest. We change and evolve over our lifetime, and so does the world around us. Now is not the time to go backwards. It's time to learn from our past, plan for our future, and act now.
There's a lot of slogans in his little closing paragraph. Anyways, I think Mr. Stewart wrote a good email. I can understand why people gravitate towards that. I think it's missing some information. I'm not saying misinformation, because factually he was correct about a lot of things. I just think he's missing some information and some context. I think everybody has an obligation to do their own research, not just to look at memes and blind statements, not just to take what anybody says, including myself, as the gospel truth, right? Do your own research, make your own decision, but don't just judge the book by its cover. Like, look a little bit deeper, do some critical thinking. That's all we need to do. And you know what? I hope this was informative for some of you. I hope I didn't offend anybody. I'm not calling anybody stupid who doesn't think like me. If you do take offense, well, I'm sorry that sucks to be you. But this is just for discussion, and everybody's going to have a different opinion, and I hope everybody can respect each other's opinions.